Flavors of the month are cool, and getting invites is cool, so by extension, Affliction Warlock is cool. The core of the Affliction Warlock is simple.
More dots, throw more dots, more dots, more dots. Come on, more dots.
Good job, you can now play Affliction Warlock. But if you want to be the very best like no one ever was, you might want to learn a little bit about managing your resources, dots and cooldowns, because statistically, Affliction is probably one of the most complex specs in the game and definitely has more to manage than any other Warlock spec. Affliction Warlock has been a staple since vanilla WoW, and for the longest time has actually been the go-to spec people thought about whenever someone mentioned the Warlock. No other class in the game is more specialized in dealing damage over time, and although our toolkit has been severely diminished since earlier times, it can still provide a nice challenge for those who either want to play a mobile versatile spec, but also like to maximize their potential. This video will be a complete guide on the Affliction Warlock, from raiding to Mythic Plus, and if you want to skip to certain parts of the video, check the timestamps in the description. Also, for the purpose of being cool and making this video more efficient, I will use acronyms for certain things like damage over time, aka dots, and transition. Warlock was once the class with the most spells in game, and in case you don't believe me, then go suck an onion and play vanilla. Sorry, I didn't mean it. I'm not really like this, but playing Warlock for a long time has kind of made me edgy. With today's iteration, you still have a lot of cool spells that provide a unique feel when playing a Warlock, and you can do a few things nobody else in the game can, like being a virtual raid bitch that gives everyone health stones, summons, teleports, and combat resurrection. Maybe this is why the top guilds are running at least one Warlock. Going over the spells, I will quickly summarize some of the most important ones that we'll actually be using or should be using in every encounter. Please don't be the dungeon Warlock that refuses to use Fell Hunter and Interrupt just because Imp gives a minuscule damage boost. Starting off with the damage spells, Agony, an instant cast dot with an 18-second duration, has a chance to generate soul shards. Using Agony on multiple targets does increase the shard gain, but it's not additive. For example, Agony on 2 targets will not double your shard gain, but increase it by something like 26%. These numbers have been tested by much smarter people, but they don't have a video on it, now do they? You want this spell up at all times. Agony starts with 1 stack and its number of stacks increases until it reaches 10 for the maximum amount of damage per second, or DPS if you're cool. If you reapply the dot before it expires, it will maintain the number of stacks already accumulated, so never let it drop. Ever. Corruption is your other most important dot. Not your second, your other. Very important distinction. It is on a 14-second duration and deals very good damage. It doesn't deal as much damage as Agony, and it doesn't generate shards. Okay, it's your second most important dot, alright? Happy now? Butt face. Unstable Affliction is definitely the most... It's the second... It's one of the... It's a castable dot. Jesus, you're making this hard. Now, this dot is a little different. It's on a 14-second duration. It cannot be refreshed, but you can cast it multiple times on the same target. It will also give you a 10% damage increase on the target, regardless of how many times the target has UA on it. Short for Unstable Affliction. Told you we were gonna abbreviate this shit. Also, Unstable Affliction costs 1 soul shard to cast. Seed of Corruption is a long cast spell that adds a debuff to the target. Upon receiving enough damage from your other spells, it will pop and deal AoE damage and apply corruption on everyone around. It costs a soul shard to cast, and it's clearly the AoE spell of our spec. Shadowbolt returns as a filler in our spell downtime, nothing special. Drain Life returns as well as our Sustain spell that deals damage in a channeled fashion and heals for 500% of the damage dealt. Fear is one of the most iconic spells, a short cast on one target that fears them for 20 seconds in PvE. Baseline for all specs we have Shadow Fury, our AoE stun, amazing on boss adds and mythic dungeons. Unending Resolve is our main defensive on an 8-second duration, reducing the damage we take by 40% and making our casts uninterruptible and unsilenceable. We also have an Incapacitate spell, Banish, that works on demons, elementals and aberrations, putting them in a stasis-like situation for 30 seconds. We mentioned utility earlier. Warlocks can provide their groups with Hellstones, which have 3 charges and can be used once per combat as with any other potion, healing the user for 25% of their maximum health, handy in pretty much all encounters. Also, we have the Ritual of Summoning, where we can create a summoning portal with the help of 2 group members. The portal can be used to summon the rest of the slackers. Works well in raids and groups where you have to add new members. And if you are pugging raids, for instance, this works really well in adding all the new additions. And one of the most important utility is the Soul Stone, our Combat Resurrection, aka CR. You can revive people with this, so you have to always be on your game when a doofus dies. Saving the best for last, as well with all Warlock specs, we have our Demons, starting off with our offensive cooldown. Summon Dark Glare, a pet that lasts for 20 seconds and deals damage to the target, damage increased by 10% for each dot present. Once summoned, it also increases the dot duration on all enemies by 8 seconds. Our normal pets are as vanilla as can be, but they of course come with the Command Demon ability that lets us use their special ability. Imps provide you with a passive 5% stamina buff and have the Cinch magic ability that can be cast to remove a harmful magic effect from a target. The Imps also have the highest damage out of all the pets, but not by enough to warrant a sacrifice on a better demon ability like the Fell Hunter's Interrupt, your only interrupt to be precise. Voidwalkers have a 30% HP buff for themselves unless a specific talent is taken. Usually use this in world questing and solo content for it to tank for you. Lastly, the Succubus has the Seduction ability on a 1.5 second cast that disorients the target for 30 seconds. You will be running with Fell Hunter mostly where interrupts are needed. In big raids where there are multiple classes that can interrupt better, Imp will be a better choice then. There are a few talent choices you can go for depending on the content you will be tackling. If no major buffs and nerfs will happen to any of them, it's likely you will stick with the following ones for the foreseeable future. For single target, we will go with this talent build that currently sims the best. Deathbolt is going to be the main pick for the first row no matter what you do, be it single target or AoE. Deathbolt is an instant cast, 30-second cooldown spell that deals damage equal to 30% of the remaining dot damage on the target at the time of the cast. Next row we take Siphon Life, another dot that deals decent damage and heals you for 30% of the damage dealt, also on a 15-second duration. Third tier is situational and based on your preference. Demon Skin provides more sustain and survivability, increasing your Soul Leech shield, making it generate passively. Burning Rush is our on-demand sprint that eats our HP, so go for this if you need mobility. Dark Pact is a 1-minute cooldown defensive spell. It sacks 20% of your current HP and converts it into a shield that equals 250% of the sacked health. A little harder to use since it will need to be popped preemptively before a big damage burst. For raids, I usually go with Demon Skin since you are already pretty mobile due to all of your instant dots. Fourth tier will be Phantom Singularity all the time, similar to first tier. Unfortunately, none of the other choices will provide a DPS increase in any type of situation. This is a very big dot that deals AoE damage and heals you for 25% of the damage dealt. 5th tier is a choice between Dark Fury that reduces the cooldown of Shadow Fury and Demonic Circle that leaves a rune on the ground to which you can teleport to avoid certain mechanics. Again, down to your needs. Demonic Circle for raids usually, and Dark Fury always for Mythic Plus. 6th tier will be Haunt for max DPS regardless of content once again. The numbers are just too much in favor of this talent. A short cast dot similar to UA that deals less damage but applies another 10% damage taken to the target. That only works for you, of course. It's on a 15-second duration and cooldown, and it will also instantly refresh if the target dies with Haunt on it. Lastly, we will take Dark Soul Misery, a 2-minute cooldown with a 30% haste buff for 20 seconds. Pretty straightforward. For AoE situations and usually Mythic Plus, we get the next setup. As you can see, some of the talents are similar, so let's discuss what actually changes. On the second row, it depends on how many targets exactly you will be fighting, and if you have the sudden offset Azerite trait that buffs Agony to start with 4 stacks off the bat. If you are fighting packs of 5, 6, 7 or more, Absolute Corruption is the best choice. It's pretty much always useful in Mythic Plus since it saves global cooldown usage because it makes Corruption last indefinitely and also buffs its damage by 15%. If you will be fighting smaller but tougher packs, or if you have the trait mentioned above, get Writhe in Agony, making Agony stack all the way up to 15 stacks. A note here, it won't reach 15 stacks by the time it expires, so you'll have to refresh it to benefit from the talent. The second to last tier, Haunt, will be the choice for max damage output as stated above, and Creeping Death will be the last choice for Mythic Dungeons, making your Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life and UA deal their damage 15% faster. You'll need to refresh the dots more often, but mobs will generally die faster anyway, so dealing your damage faster to them will make your ramp up time feel less painful. Before we move on to the next section, let's talk about Grimoire of Sacrifice. On paper, it sounds like it should be better for AoE, but the numbers are just not there. It doesn't put you behind too much, but it's still a DPS loss. However, it will replace your demon with no demon, which sometimes is good because pets die in certain encounters, rarely though. But it has one more function. If you sacrifice your Voidwalker, you get its ability for yourself, meaning you can buff yourself with a 30% HP increase for 20 seconds every 2 minutes. Additionally, if you pick the Dark Pact talent as well, you can combine them to receive a massive Absorb Shield. For niche situations where you will be soaking a mechanic that deals high amounts of burst damage, this can save your life. But again, it's niche. Let's talk about stat priority and how to properly gear. Mastery is pretty much the go-to for AoE and cleave, with haste pulling very close in single target situations. Your strength as Affliction will be single target anyway, at least for Battle for Azeroth or until they change the class again, dear god. So ideally look for gear that has both mastery and haste on it. Intellect is still the strongest stat, or at least this is what I am simming at the moment, so eye level will always be a plus. Remember though, your stat priority will change depending on how much of one stat you will stack, since each one will start to provide lower and lower benefits compared to the rest. So if you are, as some developers have mentioned, a compulsive simmer, then you will always want to sim your gear currently to what you have. I will be putting a video in a few days on how to sim your character properly, so keep an eye open for that for more details. As such, aim to get the mastery gems and enchants, and if you sim yourself and you notice haste is a better stat, switch the gems and enchants for the haste ones. I know you came to me for guidance, but I'm afraid that these stats are so close to each other that they keep swapping places depending on how much of each you have. If you don't really care about simming yourself, pick the stat you like and get the enchants for it, but always try to get the intellect gems if possible. Now on to Azerite traits. Okay, now. Unless you have been missing the Blizzard versus the community soap opera, Azerite traits are pretty controversial at the moment. Blizzard is tweaking them as of recording this video and will most likely keep tweaking them in the future. So for the absolute best, again, you will need to sim. So if Blizzard thinks you are a compulsive simmer, well, they are certainly not making this job easier for us. Of course, you can get updates on the best traits either by coming into our own Discord where we can chat and exchange stats, or simply hop onto the Warlock Discord where the boys keep their shit pretty up to date. I will still, however, list a few traits that currently, as of recording this video, seem to provide the most damage boost. Archive of the Titans and Laser Matrix seem to vastly outperform the rest and are found only in Uldir, with Dagger in the Back, Cascading Calamity and Racking Brilliance being close contenders. For the second tier traits, Overwhelming Power is by far the best one at this moment, with Heed My Call and Gut Ripper close after. Most of these work well in AoE as well, but since the spec focuses heavily on single target damage, I would recommend going for the ones mentioned and turn yourself into the boss killer your group needs. In terms of rotation, let's check the opener first. Pre-pot, of course, if you have the golds. Who are you? And precast Haunts, or Shadow Bolts if you haven't been paying attention. After this, you will start applying your dots as fast as your magic fingers will allow, because once you are done, you will need to pop your DPS Macro. This applies to you if you have a racial, like you should, because you are playing the OG Warlock race, Orc. This macro includes unused trinkets, and if you have trinkets that are not able to provide a damage boost, but you have defensive trinkets, make sure to remove them from the macro. After this, spam UAs until you have 5 on the target or you are out of soul shards, and quickly pop Dark Glare to increase the remaining time on your dots. And as you might have guessed it, after Dark Glare you immediately cast Death Bolt. This will ensure you get the maximum benefit from all of your cooldowns, and not just Death Bolt specifically. After the opener, you just have a priority system to keep in mind, and it starts with your racial and DPS trinkets, followed by Haunt, Agony, Siphon Life, Corruption, Phantom Singularity, Dark Soul. After Dark Soul, the next most important spell is UA, and it comes in 3 situations. The most important one is you'll need to cast UA if you are at 5 shards. Next, use UA if the target does not already have it to maintain its uptime and the 10% damage buff, unless you are pulling shards for Dark Glare. And lastly, UA once before every Death Bolt. Again, skip this step if you are pulling shards for Dark Glare. After you made sure UA did not drop or you were not capped on shards, cast Death Bolt on cooldown. I know it might sound better on paper to save it for the most optimal time when dots are refreshed and stars aligned, but you will actually lose out on DPS by keeping it off cooldown. And once you have all that taken care of, cast Shadow Bolt as a filler. I mentioned you need to skip a few lines if you are pulling for Dark Glare. Ideally you want to have 5 shards ready for when Dark Glare gets off cooldown. Depending on how many shards you have, you want to stop using them at all once Dark Glare has about 30 to 45 seconds remaining on its cooldown. Of course, don't cap the shard, so always cast a UA if you have 5, but Dark Glare is still not ready at the time. For AoE situations, the priority is pretty much the same. What changes is that you need Agony on maximum of 8 targets, and if you are fighting more than 3 targets, maintain Corruption with Seed to save global cooldowns, or GCDs. Of course, if you will be consistently fighting more than 4 targets, you'll probably have Absolute Corruption talented anyway, so you shouldn't worry about refreshing it. Siphon Life should be mathematically kept on maximum 4 targets, since refreshing it on more than 4 will just make you want to drink battery acid. Yay, GCDs are so fun! Lastly, keep UA on as many targets as you can to benefit from the 10% extra damage. Is all. One last thing to discuss before we move on, and this is the pandemic mechanic, which is related to your dots. This mechanic lets you renew a dot and benefit from an increase to the total dot time by 30%. This only takes effect when you renew dot, and it adds the remaining time up to a total of 130% of the normal dot duration. Mastering this mechanic will give you a nice boost. So here's an example. Agony lasts for 18 seconds. After I apply Agony, I can recast it and extend its duration by 30% off of those 18 seconds, bringing it up to a total of 24 seconds. Of course, doing this instantly is inefficient, as such you want to renew your Agony when it has less than 30-second duration remaining, and that is usually just under 6 seconds or 5.4 seconds remaining to be precise. You can use a WeakAuras for this, and our fellow Warlock Luxthos has made probably the best WeakAuras out there. You can even check him out, he's on the tubes, link below. Master refreshing dots just under 30% remaining duration, and you will maximize your DPS. For the moment, Affliction Warlock seems to be the best range DPS spec in Mythical Deer, statistically speaking of course, and one of the highest DPS specs with our current content. Whatever changes, there will always be a place for an Affliction Warlock in your group, so never lose heart. Also, please be the guy. You can be the guy with your Warlock. You know, the guy you go to when you need stuff like health stones, summon portals, flexible demon buffs and such. If you do a dungeon, always run Fell Hunter for interrupt, even if Imp seems just a tad better for you. Please be the guy. The end. Thanks for checking the video out, and please let me know if you found it useful. Also, if you think I've missed something, then it was probably intentional, because I never make mistakes. But you can let me know how wrong you are about me being wrong in the comment section below, or follow us on Discord for talks about different classes we think we are good at. All jokes aside, I am glad I decided to stick to my Warlock despite feeling this expansion is more unfriendly to caster than Legions. And maybe one day we can dabble into demonology or destruction. But I won't be top DPS though.